by now that this is the exam blueprint, which is going to be there for DevNet Expert version 1.1 lab exam. Now, in this exam, the sections that you should know about is design, develop, test, deploy, and maintain, right? That's the software development lifecycle against which your skills are going to be tested. So the exam would be divided into, I would say, 5 sections. You have section number 1, that's software design, development, and deployment. Then section number 2 would be about infrastructure as a code. Section number 3 would be about network programmability and automation. When you look at section 1, then in section 1, so it's going to be an 8-hour exam, right? And divided into 2 modules. Module number 1 will be for 3 hours. Module number 2 will be for 5 hours. The module number 1 would give you about 35 multiple choice questions, where the nature of the questions can be anything from multiple choice single answer, multiple choice multiple answer, drag and drop, and then apart from matrix questions, right? These are some of the types of questions that you will have to answer. And you will be given with bigger scenarios, like there's an email you have received from the organization's head or organization peer, and then that email consists of certain requirements. So think of yourself as you're acting as the network automation architect in the organization, who's responsible for designing and developing and testing and deploying and maintaining the network automation features that the organization wants to release or wants to develop. And you, along with your team, would be working towards consulting the other team members also, who are actually looking forward to develop an automation solution for the network infrastructure management. Now, since you are acting as the architect, you will be provided with a lot of requirements in these module 1 questions, and you are supposed to provide your inputs with respect to the knowledge that you possess, right? So the knowledge will be gauged on these exam blueprint topics. When you look at that, then over here, the first section is going to test your knowledge on software design, development, and deployment, where now all these section topics are again divided into 2 modules, right? In module 2, you will be provided with 5 hours of lab-based exam. This is where you will be provided the access of Ubuntu machine, and then that Ubuntu machine will be able to speak to a set of tools and set of network topology. The tools that would be there are gonna be like a GitLab offline server, so that you don't have to communicate to GitLab.com publicly available. There will be an offline GitLab server. There will be an offline HashiCorp Vault server. There will be an offline telemetry stack. There will be an offline, I would say, API server available, and there will be an offline Epic server available for Cisco ACI. So these are going to be common development resources tools available. Then you will have some iOS devices, a topology that's going to contain some iOS devices, some iOS XE devices, and some Nexus switches. These are 3 types of platforms that you will see in the network topology. And on this topology, you will be developing Python scripts mostly, or shell scripts, right? Or NSO service packages, or PyAds test scripts, or Terraform modules, or Ansible playbooks, or Docker container, or Docker compose files to actually deploy some sort of configuration or pull configuration, make configuration changes, and perform various activities on the infrastructure that the Ubuntu box will be connected to, right? So all these tasks and all these questions are gonna be from the blueprint section itself. So whenever you look at the blueprint says that software design, development, and deployment is the first section, where the 1.1 is about designing a solution based on an on-premises, hybrid, or public cloud deployment considering these factors, where what should be the deployment type, So that's where you need to identify whether containers needs to be used or VMs needs to be used, how the orchestration needs to be done, how automation and components and infrastructure requirements should be met in terms of deployment. So Cisco will test your knowledge on deployment, on reliability, on performance, and on infrastructure. Then Cisco would also test your knowledge on modifying an existing network automation solution based on business and technical requirements. So this is where you will be provided with scenarios, and based on that scenario, you will actually be required to make some changes to an existing automation solution, where you can also be polled with questions to actually identify what are the gaps in the current solution that the organization have implemented. Then they will test your knowledge on CI/CD pipelines. They will test your knowledge on how you can troubleshoot a CI/CD pipeline and how you can diagnose the application performance issue. For example, rate limiting or network delays, right? Or CPU utilization. And then how you can improve how your actually tool behaves or your application behaves. That's what they will be polling you on. Then when you go to second section, the second section is gonna ask you about infrastructure as a code. This is where they will ask you to build and manage and operate a Python-based REST API with a web application framework. So this is where you need to use a web application framework and develop a web application, which will actually consume APIs to communicate with some database or so. And that's where we're going to learn about Flask web application framework. This is one of the framework that we will learn in these upcoming sessions. Post that, we're going to talk about build and manage and operate Python-based CLI applications using a REST API. So how you can define your own CLI application. Over here, you develop a web application. Here, you're going to develop a CLI application. And in that CLI application, you should be able to consume APIs to actually communicate with the resource that you're talking to. And that's where we're going to use one of the popular CLI application library for Python called Click Framework and called argparse. Okay, argument parse or argparse and the Click. These are two popular CLI or Python-based CLI application development framework, which we're going to use. And we're going to learn how to use that. Then we're going to learn how to consume and use new APIs given the documentation. So that's where we're going to learn about REST and GraphQL. In version 1.0, it was only REST, but in version 1.1 blueprint, which is kind of the examination change that you're going to have from August 20th. So we will be learning GraphQL also, which is another way to consume APIs. Just like REST API, we use Postman and build up our API calls, right? Similarly, you can use APIs with the help of GraphQL. Same Postman can be used to create these APIs, but the method is a bit different. And we will learn how that works. So this is a small change that version 1.1 blueprint has, addition of GraphQL. Another change that you have is, I guess, on version 1. So they have removed some pointers, and then they have, I guess, also added another thing, which is not over here, I guess. Yeah, I guess it should be down below somewhere. I'll showcase what that is. So continuing to section 2, then you will be required to create RESTconf and NetConf payload based on a given Yang model and interpret the response. So for example, you will be given a Yang data model, let's say interface Yang data model or iOS XE native data model. And based on that data model, you are required to create a netconf or restconf payload to actually execute some configuration on iOS XE device or Nexus device. So this can be maybe interface config, this can be OSPF config, this can be BGP config, anything. Then you are also required to know how to create an XML or XPath, given that the next netconf, you can say payload to you, you should know that. How do you configure network devices on an existing infrastructure by using netconf or restconf or Yang? Then how do you consume the Ansible playbook for doing loop control or conditioning or use of variables in templating, right? Or use of connection plugins such as Network CLI, HTTP API, NetConf. This is something that we recently did in our infrastructure automation project in DevCo, right? We will be continuing with that. And then how you can use Terraform to actually manage some infrastructure. That's also something which we will be learning. So if you look at this, in this section, we're going to learn about Flask Web Application Framework. We're going to learn about Click CLI Application Development Framework. We're going to learn about REST API and GraphQL. We're going to learn about NetConf, RESTconf again in a depth. And we will learn about Ansible. We'll learn about Terraform. And we will learn about NSO. So with NSO, you should know how to install NSO, how to add devices in NSO, how to manage the devices added in the NSO, how to create service packages, how to deploy these services packages and use them, right? That's something which you should know about NSO, which we are going to learn. And then in section number 3, you should actually know about how to create, modify, and troubleshoot scripts by using Python libraries and SDK documentation to automate against API. This is where request library consumption needs to be understood for all these platforms. So for ACI, how can you read the API documentation or REST API document for ACI, App Dynamics, Catalyst Center, FTM, Intersight, iOS XE, Meraki, NSO, WebEx? You should be able to build your, you can say, Python scripts by using request library and communicate with these resources and make modifications. So there is another change over here. Earlier, the name of the Catalyst Center was DNA Center. So they have made that change. And another one is they have added a small component called App Dynamics, which we are going to learn what's App Dynamics and how to use that. So that's a very basic minor release that they have there. And the change that you see here. And they have removed, I guess, UCS director, yeah, which was earlier as part of it, but I guess it's reaching end of life, so they have received that solution from here. Then you should know that on iOS XE devices, how to configure interfaces, static routes, VLANs, access control lists, BGP and OSP of routing tables, BGP and OSP of neighbors using model-driven programmability, which is NetConf RESTconf. So that's something which you should know about, and we very well know that. Then you will be required to modify and troubleshoot automated tests using PyAts. So we will learn how to work with PyATS in this training. We will learn how to work with model-driven telemetry well in detail. That's something that we're going to work with. And post that, on last page, you have section 4 and 5. So everything related to Docker containers and Kubernetes. So we will learn how to create a Docker image using Dockerfile. We will learn how to package and deploy a solution using Docker Compose. You will learn how to package and deploy a solution using Kubernetes. And we will learn how to create, consume, and troubleshoot a Docker host and bridge-based networks and integrate them with external networks. Post that, we will learn about the secure application security parameters, which are how secure ways can be consumed to log in into API endpoints. We have so far using only username and password based authentication, right? Here we will learn about API access keys, access tokens, and how to consume OAuth 2 authentication tokens and all that. So that's gonna be your DevNet expert journey.